Greetings, students of ancient world history. This week we're on chapter 8.3. The title of that chapter is The Early Christian Church. And the outline is really a brief one. Of course, Roman numeral 1 is the early Christian church. Capital letter A underneath that is the organization of the church. And then it goes on to have a very brief 3-page chapter, and the B is the only other letter in your outline that you'll have to fill in. You could go into some of the vocabulary terms in your outline and use those as numerals under the letters. You have a bishopric, and I'll talk about that. We're looking at the Catholic Church primarily right now. Monks, monasteries, monasticism, missionaries, and then the counter on the female side for a monk, it would be a nun. So the monks and nuns, they were like social workers for the church. Now, what I go over today as an introduction to this section is going to be very helpful when you do your lesson review. So I'm just going to go through these things now, but you'll find answers to everything that's asked in your lesson review. So, first of all, very famous monk, the one that's got everything started, the idea of the monastery and who developed it, was Benedict. And he divided the day into a series of activities for the monks that emphasized prayer and manual labor. So they did a lot of praying and they did a lot of work. Sometimes the monk would have to work in the garden and get the vegetables. Another monk would work in the kitchen preparing and cooking. And but both would always have intervals of prayer, because their whole day centered around prayer and manual labor. Eventually they started schools, and they even did health care for the village. So you could say that they started the first rudimentary hospitals in the area. They took a vow of poverty, and because they worked in manual labor, like I said, sometimes gardening, sometimes cooking, they also did a lot of copying ancient documents. And some of them were very good at art, and some of the texts are actually quite beautiful because they would put drawings and so on in with the transcribed words. So both monks and nuns, basically they withdrew from the world. You wouldn't find the monastery in the center of the town. It would often be out, away from the town, where it was a little more isolated. Monks and nuns withdrew from the world, preserved learning in books, copied books. They were active in spreading Christianity across Europe. They were missionaries. As far as the organization of the church, priests led parishes. A group of parishes was called a bishopric, and it was headed by a bishop. And there were 4 major cities that were bishoprics. Rome was one, and Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria in Egypt. And the Bishop of Rome became known as the Pope, and the Pope was the head of the church and developed a lot of political power as time went on. As I said before, monks were social workers and educators for the church. They started schools, healthcare facilities, uh, and the church at the time was the center of village social life. Everything revolved around the church. Monasteries preserved ancient documents and provided education and health services. And popes gained political power.